I'd like to welcome everyone to the 2024 commencement ceremony of Penn State Law and University Park. Each year, 2 students are chosen by their peers to make remarks at commencement. We will hear first from LLM degree candidate Temurbek Pulatov.
We wouldn't be here today but for the constant moral and even financial support.
My name is Lara Fowler. I'm currently serving as Penn State's Chief Sustainability Officer. I've also been a professor of teaching here at Penn State Law for a number of years.
It's great that you have 50 students this year. This is unprecedented. It's very hard, they say, to study law and journalism abroad, because when you get back to the harshest reality when it comes to these 2 fields. As your students are now heading back, what kind of advices are you giving them so that they go back to practice law and do not leave the field or do not consider other options?
Over the last several years, I've actually had a chance to teach a lot of Uzbeki students. I teach energy law, water law, negotiation, and mediation. In particular, the students who've taken a more experiential law class, it's to really ask them to think about, well, how do the laws play out anywhere in the world? Or if you're, for example, trying to think about mediating an issue, how do you bring people together no matter what the circumstances are? So we spend a lot of time really thinking about what's happening not just in the United States, but how do they then compare with what they're working on anywhere in the world. So for example, last fall I taught energy law and students had to write a paper about a topic that they're choosing. It could be Uzbeki law plus energy, which a couple students did.
Which is very important.
Right. And so it's, I think, a way to teach, to think about the legal system here, but also apply it to what you already know and think about how to blend those 2 sets of knowledge.
Energy, climate, these are hot issues in Uzbekistan as well. And you have a lot of new businesses focusing on these. And then you have additional government agencies, state agencies. So the government is evolving with all these challenges with energy and climate. And they all need lawyers,
right?
You know. So, and America leads in expertise in these fields as well. So, you know, you're talking about energy law, you're talking about environmental law. You don't hear these concepts yet in Central Asia, specifically in Uzbekistan. They need these specialists. Sure. What are the ways for the government and the private sector to utilize the knowledge and expertise that these students have gotten here there? How best they can use them?
I think just simply,
to move forward.
It's a great question. How do you actually tap into that knowledge? And one of the privileges of working with the number of students that I have, how can the government of Uzbekistan or even local or regional governments take advantage of that? Some of it is just to ask. So these are students who've come into a class and they've been curious enough about the topic to actually dive into it and sort of say, oh, I'm interested in water, I'm interested in energy, I'm interested in environmental mediation. I had a couple students did really wonderful papers looking at air quality in Tashkent, for example. Lots of different parties involved, lots of legal questions. How do you actually go from, this is kind of a collective problem, what do we do about it? And I think the students, we were able to talk through what's working, but also what's not working here in the United States. But I think people were really learning from each other, not just US law, but for example, last year when I taught energy, I had probably 12 different countries represented. And so the students are also hearing, oh, what is happening in Ecuador or Bolivia or Colombia or Norway, right? And so it's a really rich opportunity for learning not only US law, but to think about your own law. What I've lived in 3 different countries, and every time I've left my home country, I've actually learned a lot about where I'm from. Mm-hmm. And so it allows you, I think, sometimes to hold up that mirror and sort of say, what can I take from what I just learned and apply it to where I am now? The energy space is profoundly, profoundly important. Climate, we're seeing the impacts of that all over the world. And so we spend a lot of time talking about not only the legal pieces of it, but at one point some of my students are like, I didn't know I was taking a science class or an economics class, because we're also talking about not just the legal structure, but the economics, the biophysical principles that really don't matter where you are in the world, coal or sunshine, or natural gas or hydroelectric power is the same or similar no matter where you go. And so I think there's some commonalities to be learned from something like that.
So far, those people who have been fighting for environmental justice, for corruption in the energy sector, and anything that has to do with climate, environment, are not lawyers. They're usually local activists, grassroots groups, and the government usually criticizing them for not having enough legal knowledge or expertise to question the policies in place. And there comes then the role of professional legal experts, those who have, as you were describing, the understanding, the wider lens about how these things work around the world. And Uzbekistan has been struggling there because it doesn't have a strong civil society, and yet you have enormous issues. The big question in Uzbekistan is how do we get to a place where we have enough or considerable number of professional lawyers or legal experts who help us tackle all these issues, who help us forge a proper civil society, who help the government understand that these are serious grievances to consider, and the courts become independent enough to see these cases and do them. So I know these are $1 million questions, but do you keep those things in mind when you teach international students in the environments that they come from? How do you prepare them for those challenges when they go back? Especially from the countries of Central Asia.
I'll give you an example of a student not from Central Asia, but I had a young attorney from Honduras, where corruption, climate, water, energy were all really profound issues. And I had to have a hard conversation with her in thinking about training her, it was to say, I'm not sure you can safely go home, because of the concern, a huge number of environmental lawyers, where they even have them, were being killed. And so, yes, I'm very aware and very mindful of the environmental justice questions and how they're playing out. And even in the United States, we struggle with that. So, for example, in water, a water-related question, if it goes up through the courts, often a judge has had a little bit of exposure first year in property law, but not for years. And so I have colleagues who are actually very proactively thinking about how do we train the legal world for some of these questions. And they're starting to be, they're almost the equivalent of engineers beyond borders. There almost needs to be actually perhaps environmental lawyers beyond borders. How do we work cooperatively together? Because these issues are the same in a lot of different places. What are fair and just rates? What's fair and just access to energy? How do you make sure those who need it the most have access to it? It's an economics question. It's a gender question. So it's a question I think about quite a bit. So working with students, we're talking about the power structures, the governance structures, how decisions are made, who is making those decisions, kind of unpacking the whole system.
Like teaching policy, basically.
Teaching policy, but also teaching, thinking about those policy levers. How do you make a difference in what's again, it's a U.S.-centric focused class, something like energy law, but is really saying, okay, but let's look at what's happening in Jamaica or in Uzbekistan or in Kazakhstan, right? I have a student from Central Asia talk to us about what's playing out on the ground in your country. And then I'm often having the students work together where they're also then teaching each other, because that's the beauty of having this many international students in one place, is they really are ambassadors to each other.
How do Uzbek students stand out? What kind of challenges do you think they had during this year? LLM students, if you've noticed, how do you think they dealt with it? Because it's not easy to study abroad, and it's not easy to study law, and that too if you just have a year.
I think all of these students stand out for their bravery in jumping into the deep end. As I mentioned, I've lived abroad, and to move to a foreign country and to study law, I'm not sure I could do it. I lived in Japan and studied Japanese, but that's not studying law in Japanese, right? And so to show up, I think what helps is that they're actually a group here together, professional students. And I'm in touch with a lot of my students who have graduated from here and are now in Uzbekistan.
Great.
And just to hear what they have taken from this, to be talking with them about their experiences as they're working with other students. I think the students, as they build a cohort, actually have a better understanding of what they're getting into. To show up, to figure out the culture, figure where do I eat? How do I navigate? How do I get around? But that cohort, I think, really makes a difference for being able to dive into the deep end. And again, my students that I've had the privilege of working with the last 3 or 4 years, I think, have really been curious, been very open and interested in learning more about, like, what is the system? Again, the students in my environmental mediation class, I learned as much from them, I think, as maybe they learned from me. Of this is an area of the world where I've never had the privilege to go and would love to, but what are the local issues? How do they play out? And are there ways that we can all learn from each other?
Mm-hmm. Amazing. Well, they had a lot of great things to say, and they were very genuine. I mean, they could have, wine if they wanted to,
sure,
but they didn't. But they really appreciated when I asked them about the differences. Mm-hmm. They said, we really love how professors really cared about us individually. And even when we didn't notice, they were watching us and they were caring for us, and they felt that. Wow. So that was wonderful.